Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Department of Toxic Substance Control public meeting and hearing on the draft permit for Phibro-Tech Incorporated Santa Fe Springs facility. We will refer to Phibro-Tech Incorporated as PTI throughout the rest of this meeting. My name is Tammy Pickens. I am the Public Participation Specialist with the Department of Toxic Substance Control, which we will refer to as DTSC through the rest of this meeting. Next slide. Public meeting and hearing includes the public meeting, the permitting process overview, draft permit decision, Q&A session, 5-minute break, public hearing instructions, formal comment section, next steps and closing. Again, presentation materials, English and Spanish, are available at DTSC PTI Draft Permit Presentation, July 12, 2023, using the link provided in the chat. Please select the Community Involvement tab. On this list is the technical experts who will be available during the interactive Q&A session, which is designed to explain the presentation. The Q&A session will assist with submitting formal comments during the hearing portion. Tonight, you will be hearing from Phil Bloom and Rao Akula. I will now introduce Katie Butler, Deputy Director, Hazardous Waste Program, for her welcoming remarks. Katie.
Thank you, Tammy. Good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Butler. I'm the Deputy Director of the Hazardous Waste Management Program. I'm relatively new to this position, but I'm not new to the issues around Phibro-Tech. For 8 years, I worked at the Department of Public Health in Los Angeles County, and Phibro-Tech was on our radar because of the historic hexavalent chromium contamination. One of the reasons I came to DTSC was because of DTSC's mission to protect public health and the environment. I know many of you logged on tonight because you also care deeply about your health, your communities, your community health, and the environment. And I sincerely thank you for taking time out of your busy night. This draft permit decision is a challenging one for several reasons. It's the oldest continued permit DTSC has on the books, and Phibro-Tech has a long history of non-compliance and contamination. We received many comments from you and many others who may not have been able to make it tonight. And my team and I are personally reviewing and carefully considering each one of these comments. I also want to acknowledge the rigor and importance of new permit conditions that staff have carefully crafted in this proposed permit. These new permit conditions mean requirements that DTSC would place on this facility, such as strengthened financial assurance and compliance with our corrective action order. These conditions are critical to DTSC's ability to provide strong oversight of Phibro-Tech. So I'm sure you have many questions and comments prepared for this evening. I will remain on standby to support my team in responding to them after the presentation. And I'll hand it over now to Phil Blum, who's our supervisor in the permitting division. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate that welcome and introduction. Good evening, everyone. I am Phil Bloom. I am a California licensed civil engineer. I have been with DTSC since 1994. I have worked in DTSC permitting, cleanup, and enforcement groups. As a project manager in permitting, I was responsible for some of the most challenging landfill closure plans in California. I also worked on cleaning up contaminated aerospace sites and other contaminated hazardous waste facilities. As a supervisor in DTSC's Task Force and Special Investigations branch, my team and I worked with the environmental crimes task forces throughout California to investigate and prosecute environmental crimes. Most recently, I have been the permitting supervisor responsible for DTSC's permitting oversight of the PTI facility since 2013. Let me take a moment to remind everyone of the format for tonight's meeting. As Tammy explained, the first part of the meeting is a presentation from DTSC. During my part of the presentation, I will summarize DTSC's history, mission, and role in regulating the hazardous waste industry, as well as a brief description of the DTSC process of considering hazardous waste facility applications and making permit decisions. Then our DTSC project manager for the PTI permit decision, Rao Akula, will give an overview of the PTI facility history and operations, as well as DTSC's oversight of the facility over the years, including permitting, enforcement, and cleanup, as well as the permit application, the draft permit that DTSC has prepared, and DTSC's draft permit decision. After Rao's presentation, we will have a question and answer session. During that time, everyone who wishes to ask a question and receive a brief informal response from DTSC will have an opportunity to do so. DTSC will not be preparing formal written responses to those questions. We will limit each question to 3 minutes so that everyone has a chance. After the Q&A session, we will have a brief break, and then we will reconvene for the hearing portion of today's meeting. During that time, anyone who wishes to make a comment on the record will have 3 minutes to do so. DTSC will not be responding to the formal comments during this meeting. The comments will be recorded, and we will prepare a written response to comments document, which will be released with the permit decision. Now, this meeting is being translated, and those that want to listen to the Spanish translation, you should select the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and choose Spanish. Now, if you are happy listening in English, that's great, but if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, I want to make sure that you know that you have to select the English option, or we may have trouble with the audio. Okay, thank you very much. Now, next slide, please. So who is DTSC, you may find yourself asking. So we are scientists, engineers, toxicologists, chemists, geologists, attorneys, criminal investigators, and many other highly qualified public servants. We are dedicated to protecting Californians and our environment from exposure to hazardous wastes and by enforcing hazardous waste laws and regulations. Many of our coworkers have dedicated their careers to DTSC as the place that we can best serve the public and protect the environment. We're committed to engaging the public in a way that gives those most affected by our decisions opportunities to voice their concerns and ask questions. For more information about DTSC, please access this link. And so please paste the link in the chat feature so that people can click on it directly if they wish. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So at DTSC, we have carefully considered our mission. Our mission is to protect public and the environment from toxic substances. The permitting division specifically oversees permitted hazardous waste facilities in California that treat, store, or dispose of hazardous waste. If a company would like to treat, store, or dispose of hazardous waste, they must submit a permit application to DTSC for our review and approval to ensure they operate safely and legally to protect our health and the environment. And so on the slide, this is the permitting division's mission statement that we have established that guide our activities of the permit decision, of all the activities of permitting. Next slide, please. So DTSC is holding this meeting because we have found a significant degree of interest in the draft permit that we prepared for PTI. To understand our decision to prepare the permit for PTI, it is important to understand the history and context of hazardous waste regulation. How did we go from having no rules about the management of hazardous waste in the distant past, when companies often dumped hazardous waste on the ground or down the sewer or in unlined landfills, to California now having established the strongest and most comprehensive laws and regulations in the country? So, to solve the problems with hazardous waste, California enacted the Hazardous Waste Control Act of 1972, establishing a legal definition and legal standards for managing hazardous waste. In 1973, 50 years ago, the Department of Health Services created a hazardous waste management unit with 5 employees focused on developing regulations and setting fees. The federal government subsequently enacted a more comprehensive law covering hazardous waste known as the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act of, or RCRA, in 1976. Shortly thereafter, the Love Canal tragedy of 1978 vastly increased public concern and resulted in a major expansion of funding for hazardous waste regulation when it was discovered that a neighborhood was built on an abandoned hazardous waste landfill. In 1991, the DHS, the California Department of Health Services Hazardous Waste Management Group, was reinvented as the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And then in 1992, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, US EPA, authorized DTSC to implement RCRA. Over the next 29 years, DTSC has developed robust permitting, cleanup, and enforcement programs, and both federal and state laws and regulations have been refined and expanded as needed. Over the past 10 years, DTSC has conducted an extremely comprehensive evaluation and enhancements of our permitting program and has implemented a process of continuous improvements. See the DTSC website that we pasted the link in earlier for more information about DTSC's history and programs and about DTSC oversight of the Phibro-Tech facility and the draft Phibro-Tech permit. Oh, and also this link on the slide, if you can please paste that into the chat, has more details about DTSC's history. Okay, next slide, please. So now, what does it take to renew a hazardous waste facility permit with DTSC? Is it like renewing your driver's license at the DMV? You just go online, pay a few bucks, fill out a form, and get your license sent in the mail? Well, not really, of course. DTSC's permitting process is quite complicated. The current process flow diagram that we use has about 110 boxes on it that describe individual processes that we conduct to review a draft permit application. It can take years, and reimbursing DTSC's charges can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But to summarize, there are 5 main phases of DTSC's permitting process as shown on the slide. During the pre-application phase, we reach out to the potential applicant and engage with them to schedule a pre-application meeting so that DTSC can explain DTSC's expectations and current requirements for a permit application, the applicable cost involved, and various details of the process. For many types of permit renewals, a pre-application public meeting is also required. Within 30 days after an applicant submits a permit application for review, that would be the second box, DTSC reviews it briefly to determine if the required information and sections are included. If not, DTSC notifies the applicant of the deficiencies and a timeline for resubmittal. Once an application is deemed administratively complete, in other words, if we find that they have all the required parts, DTSC begins a thorough, detailed technical review. We review each application line by line from beginning to end using an extremely detailed technical checklist with over 1,000 specific items to determine if the application and the facility meet all the applicable legal and regulatory requirements. We conduct other reviews as well, including reviewing the required tank assessments, closure, post-closure, and corrective action cost estimates, reviews of financial assurance documents and insurance to verify that the permittee has provided funds to DTSC to safely close and clean up the facility if the permittee cannot, and to assure that there is insurance to cover costs of environmental liability in the event of an accidental release or other harm. Quite often, DTSC identifies deficiencies in an application and notifies the applicant of the deficiencies and a due date to correct and resubmit the application. Several notices of deficiency may be required. Eventually, the permittee will submit a complete application, or conversely, DTSC will decide that the permittee is unable or unwilling to submit a complete application. Subsequently, if the application is deemed complete, DTSC prepares a draft permit for public review and comment. In the event that DTSC decides to deny a permit application, the notice of permit denial will be prepared for public review. During the public comment period, DTSC often holds a public meeting such as this one tonight. After receiving input from the public, DTSC will consider all the comments and prepare a response to comments document. DTSC will decide, based on all the information available, including every comment received, whether to finalize the draft permit, revise and finalize the draft permit, or deny the draft permit. DTSC will then issue the final permit and the response to comment document, or in the event that we deny the draft permit, a notice of the decision to deny the draft permit. If any person that participated in the process believes that DTSC made a mistake on any condition or the entire permit, they may appeal DTSC's decision to the Board of Environmental Safety. Next slide, please. So the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, is a whole separate law from the other laws I mentioned that regulate hazardous waste. And the California Environmental Quality Act requires all government agencies in California, including DTSC, to consider the environmental impacts of the decisions they make. So in addition to reviewing permit applications for compliance with the hazardous waste laws and regulations, DTSC also reviews the environmental the environmental impacts of its decisions and prepares an environmental document as required by CEQA. Consistent with CEQA, DTSC must prepare different types of CEQA documents for different levels of environmental impacts identified. So the decision to the draft decision to approve the Phibro-Tech permit is a decision that's subject to CEQA, and so we have considered we have implemented CEQA for the permit, and we'll go over that on the next slide. But in general, when DTSC determines a CEQA exemption applies, on the right side of the slide are the list of potential CEQA documents we might prepare depending upon different circumstances. So if we determine a CEQA exemption applies, we would likely prepare a notice of exemption. For projects where DTSC analyzes the environmental impacts in an initial study and finds that there would be no significant impacts of the project, DTSC would prepare a negative declaration, basically declaring that we didn't find any significant impacts. If an initial study found potential significant impacts that could be mitigated to be less than significant, DTSC would require changes to the scope of the project to eliminate the significant impacts and prepare a mitigated negative declaration, meaning that we mitigated the potential significant impacts by requiring changes so that the impacts would be less than significant. Now, if there are potential significant impacts to a project that might not be possible to mitigate, we would prepare an environmental impact report, or an EIR. When a previous CEQA document was prepared, like for example, for a prior permit decision for the same facility, DTSC reviews the analysis conducted in the prior CEQA document and assesses whether the conclusions are still valid. If there are no changes, no further CEQA document is required. If there are changes from the previously considered project scope that are less than significant, an addendum is required to update the previous document. If the changes are substantial, a subsequent document must be prepared. Next slide, please. So specifically with respect to DTSC CEQA compliance for the PTI permit decision, DTSC has conducted CEQA reviews of various of PTI's activities over the years, including reviews conducted in 1988, 1990, 1991, 1994, 1995, 2003, 2008, 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2019. With respect to CEQA review for the PTI hazardous waste facility permit, in 1990, DHS prepared a draft initial study and negative declaration and circulated them for public review with the draft permit. The final initial study and negative declaration for the original permit decision was adopted in 1991. A notice of determination was filed with the Office of Planning and Research, State Clearinghouse, after the original permit became effective in 1991. For this renewal, today, when we're considering the permit application and our draft permit, DTSC determined that an addendum to the previous initial study and negative declaration is the appropriate environmental document. No significant environmental impacts are expected to be caused by the renewal of the permit. The addendum updates the previously adopted initial study and negative declaration and therefore is not subject to review and comment. Next slide, please. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Rao Akula, the DTSC Permitting Division's Permitting Project Manager for the PTI Permit Renewal Project. Welcome, Rao.
Thank you, Phil. Good evening. My name is Rao Akula. I'm a California licensed chemical engineer. I have lived and worked in Southern California for about 33 years and counting. I have worked in the private industry as well as the government during these 33 years. I first joined DTSC in the year 2000. In DTSC, I worked in two programs, permitting and cleanup, as a project manager, as a supervisor, and as a senior engineer. Next slide, please. This slide contains all the topics I'm going to address in my part. First, about the process specific to PTI draft permit. Next slide, please. These are all the documents DTSC prepared in this context on the tasks DTSC will complete. The first bullet shows what we prepared for public information and review. The second bullet, in the second bullet, we're taking public comments into this, the second bullet regarding that, we're taking public comments into consideration. And we have renoticed this because of comments that we received so far. We extended the public comment period twice last year, and our reopened current public review period and an extra public repository we opened in the Los Nietos Public Library are all part of DTSC actions in response to comments received. And in the third bullet, we did conduct a public meeting and hearing last year. This current meeting and hearing are also added in response to public comments. The fourth bullet on, these are the remaining DTSC tasks. Next slide, please. What you see here is an aerial view of the facility and the surrounding area. And in the chat, you'll find a link for this. This is a Google Maps link. And if you are able to take that link and open a browser, you will be able to actually fly up and down as if you're a drone and see the facility and the surroundings a little bit more. This is just an example of what it looks like at a particular elevation. We picked this one to show you exactly where the facility is and what its immediate vicinity is like. Next slide, please. Here you see again the picture and some basic details about the facility, what it does and what comes in, what happens in there, and what comes out. Next slide, please. So here is a summary slide for all the technical part of this effort. Our conclusions relevant to the draft permit are shown here. DTSC evaluated the permit application and the safety of operations thoroughly. Regular annual inspections are conducted. The new regulations for violation scoring procedure that came in effect since 2019, they aim to make the process of enforcement transparent and consistent. Many more special conditions are added to make the operations safer and the regulatory compliance effective. A permit condition, like Katie mentioned just before, is an enforceable written statement in the permit that the permittee is required to comply with. We also included several slides in here to show examples of these conditions for this permit, what they are, what they do, etc. I'll explain how we reach these findings in the following slides. Next slide, please. So this is about PTI's operations. It supports the computer manufacturing industry, printed circuit boards, that kind of waste that comes out of the industry. And it does treatment of the hazardous waste. And there are some California hazardous waste also. But the facility does produce products from the facility that are sold in the market. The products are copper carbonate, copper oxide, copper sulfate, ferrous chloride. For those of you who are interested in knowing more about the operations, we included here a link from the Phibro-Tech facility, in their own words, what they are, what they do, etc. Next slide, please. So this is a facility operations history. What we did here is provide a timeline for the context. There's much more information than what we just showed here. Back in 1908, Santa Fe Springs oil field was considered one of the richest pools in petroleum history. DTSC records indicate that industrial activities began at PTI site as early as 1920s. In the 1920s, the SFS, Santa Fe Springs oil field, produced as much as 345,000 barrels per day, exceeding production at Signal Hill and Huntington Beach. In 1938, the field had yielded a total of more than 440 million barrels of oil. So there is a big, rich history of oil production in the field in Santa Fe Springs. So there was also foundry and casting industries operated since the early 1940s. And it was a chemical manufacturing facility since the 1950s. The legal entity now known as Phibro-Tech has been in the facility, they had been the owner or, with different names, at least since 1984. Next slide, please. So this facility was issued a permit first in 1991, as Phil mentioned, by actually two agencies, United States Environmental Protection Agency, US EPA, and California Department of Health Services. So these were the days when DTSC was still not in place, but the DHS later became DTSC, as Phil explained. The 1996 permit renewal application was revised multiple times. A draft permit was prepared in 2010. Based on the feedback and the comments received, DTSC asked PTI to completely revise the permit application and resubmit in 2014. So in a sense, there was a new start in 2014. There were two more formal revisions to the application, once in 2016, another time in 2021 from DTSC reviews. The permit modification seen here were requested by PTI, most of which were based on DTSC directives. PTI had been under the oversight and regulatory authority of DTSC the entire time, conducting corrective action, inspections, permit modifications, etc. Next slide, please. This slide basically describes the corrective action activities that have been completed. Many types of remediation activities with administrative engineering, health and safety and regulatory controls were completed at the site. These include scoop and hauls, soil vapor extractions, and there was a injection of a chemical called calcium polysulfide that was injected to convert the hexavalent chromium to trivalent chromium and arrest reduced migration of hexchrome to the soil, in the soil to the groundwater. A lot more details are there, but the focus of the meeting here is about the permit decision. But DTSC has another program that actually manages site mitigation, and we work very closely with whatever that happens in both programs. Next slide, please. So there was mentions of compliance history. Okay, so here's a summary of what type of past violations occurred at the facility. More complete details, are available on the DTSC website, Inspection and Monitor. There's a link for that is provided at the bottom of the slide and in the chat. So those of you who are interested in more details, you can go to this link and review the details and feel free to come back to me or the inspector, whoever has conducted as necessary. Next slide, please. This chart was prepared based on information on the DTSC Inspection and Water webpage mentioned in the last slide. The ribbon with the colored diamonds represents DTSC's inspections of the facility, and the circles represent financial reviews from 1995 to present. There's a lot of details. The legend at the top shows the meaning of these different colors. For example, the green diamonds or circles means no violations were found. The other colors indicate the most serious level of violations that were found during the inspection. If the most serious violation found was class 1, it is shown in red. If class 2, it's in orange. And if it's a minor violation, then it's in yellow. The most serious of all these violations is class 1, the red ones. They can have significant penalties associated with them. The nature and impact of issues behind class 2 and minor violations are less serious. Class 2 violations, which are orange, have minor penalty amounts, and they're given to encourage closer regulatory compliance. Minor violations, the yellow ones, have no monetary penalties. They're intended to encourage and enhance safe operation practices. Now, there is a column here in this table, return to compliance date. These are the dates that all of the violations have been corrected against that year. Note that if repeat violations are found in later inspection, the penalties can be sharply increased. And the repeat of class 2 violation is often considered to be a class 1 violation and may be assigned correspondingly higher penalties. See, the number of more serious class 1 have been reduced to 0 in the recent years. The one in 2023, at the time we prepared the slides, was given a class 2. And I understand there is a process in place to actually change that to a class 1 violation. But the general trend, if you see, the number of class 1 violations have gone down since 2020. Next slide, please. So how do we assure compliance in the future? Some of you know SB 673 was signed in 2015, and there were 2 tracks in there. And once a law is signed into place by the governor, the regulatory agencies develop the regulations and implement them. The track 1 was effective from 2019. Track 2 regs development is in progress. Okay, so the permit, it includes descriptions of units, authorized waste and activities, conditions for safe operations. You can see what all it includes there. And enforcement is carried out based on the 4 bullets that actually follow under the enforcement. Next slide, please. So what is different now? The first bullet is about the cleanup. Phibro-Tech has cleaned up the hex chrome in the soil to levels that are safe. In the second bullet, the remaining requirements for corrective action related operation and maintenance, basically these are the remaining activities, right? They correspond to the operation maintenance and address the threats to the groundwater quality. That's what is remaining. Third and fourth bullets are, it's about a surface impoundment. Phibro-Tech closed this surface impoundment. That was an issue for many years. Both the bullets had some complex interdependencies, and difficulties implementing. They're all addressed right now as we speak. Next slide, please. So the permitted treatment capacity had been restricted to ensure safety of the operations. The new permit application does not have any claims for any regulatory exemptions in the name of recycling. All the past enforcement issues around issues of exclusions, exemptions have now been resolved. They contain a number of, violations that you may find in the inspection website I mentioned before. And then there's another thing called RCRA listed waste. These are some kind of a special kind of waste that can technically remain to be hazardous waste even after treatment. So the new permit application, PTI proposed that such waste will not be brought in for treatment or storage in the facility. So in a way, the operation and regulatory compliance are much more streamlined. So this operational change basically makes the inspections and enforcements more straightforward. Next slide, please. For those who understand better by looking at numbers, here is a different way of showing what is different and where. NR, when you see NR, what it means is newly regulated. There are areas that were not previously part of the permit, the old permit that was in 1991, but now they are part of the permit. This way, DTSC ensures better oversight and compliance. So when you see, for example, the storage capacity for containers, it has gone up. It was basically some of the existing areas are brought into regulatory, in the same footprint. They are now regulated. So that's how the increase happened. There are no significant expansion in the capacities, just more regulated units and improvements that help compliance and safer operations. So in the old permit, there were not many regulated units. There was no separation of regulated units as as they are now in the new permit, very detailed. See, that's the major difference. What you see, there was not there in 1990 permit application, 1991 permit, but in the current draft, there's about 40 permitted hazardous waste management units. Next slide, please. So here, the first bullet covers many years, which will be many areas, I'm sorry, which will be part of the new permit. Okay, there were enforcement issues and disputes over the past between the department and the permittee, which have all been settled and agreed to. And the permittee is now proposing to make these areas as part of the permitted operations. The second bullet basically describes the new constructions that are being authorized. These include provisions for expanding the storage areas for the waste to make sure they're all stored in line with the regulations and DTSC requirements for aisle space, stacking limits, improvements to make the operations safer and more enforceable. There are some new container pumping stations that better align with the regulations and requirements, like secondary containment, management of spills, etc., while handling this hazardous waste. So the last bullet is about removing whatever the new construction replaces functionally. Next slide, please. The first bullet is about the permit term. Typically there for 10 years, the permit renewals in view of the compliance history and to make sure compliance history can be evaluated sooner than the typical 10-year milestone. DTSC is proposing a 5-year term instead of maximum 10-year term. The third bullet, the previous permit was issued in 1991, did not have any unit-specific special conditions in the operations, basically. But now we got, 40 units with unit-specific special conditions and also general special conditions. And the fourth bullet, it describes the kind of measures that are in place. There are about 100 conditions in the draft permit for operating the facility, all of which are designed to make the facility operate safely and protect nearby communities. The special conditions with this authorization, they include, there are fence line monitors, contingency plans, how they should be managed, and how we need to assess the tank assessments more frequently than before, and there will be revisions in the financial assurance amounts more in line with where we are today. We're moving past the renewals and closures now and moving more into the post-closure and maintenance mode, looking to address threats to groundwater. The total amount of money that is available for financial assurance is approximately the same what is currently available, but the amounts in the individual items will be adjusted to reflect the current situation and the current regulatory requirements. A lot more conditions are added in the new draft permit that replaces the old one. The new permit provides many more checks and verification points to make the operations safe, protective, and accountable. Next slide, please. What we show here are some examples of descriptions or samples for the special conditions added into the new draft permit. One of the special conditions worth mentioning here is the requirement for increased communication with the surrounding community with respect to facilities operations and environmental monitoring and performance details. Also included are the requirements for reporting incidents, violations from any other agencies with oversight of the facility operations. Next slide, please. Just another set of special conditions that were added. These reflect control measures aimed at safe operations and better oversight by DTSC. Next slide, please. We required permittee to conduct 2 risk assessments under DTSC oversight and review that DTSC approved back in 2015. DTSC reviewed the comments, received comments expressing concerns about safety of the operations and the potential impacts on the surrounding communities. DTSC approved some specific measurable, basically risk assessments on both the current operations as well as the possible risks from the past releases. The findings, you want to go back? I thought we were at the, oh, can you go to the next slide? Yeah. The health risk assessments, next one. Yeah, thank you, James. So I'll start over again. There were 2 health risk assessments that DTSC conducted addressing possible risk from the past releases as well as current operations. And the findings show that there are no significant health risks identified with the operations of the facility or the cleanup of the historic contamination. There's also a land use covenant. You know, sometimes some people call it deed restriction. It's a tool that the Department of DTSC utilizes when exposure to contamination can be controlled through specifically defined restrictions. So this LUC was put in place back in 1995, and corrective action measures have been going on since then. DTSC also put in a corrective action consent agreement or order, okay, with specifics on what needs to be done, with timelines, etc., to implement required corrective action requirements. That is, cleanup of contamination in the soil and groundwater guided by the health risk assessments. Next slide, please. So here's the summary slide, which I showed at the beginning of my presentation. Our conclusions relevant to for the draft permit are shown here. DTSC evaluated the permit application multiple times and the safety of operations thoroughly. Regular annual inspections are conducted. The new regulations for VSP are aimed at making the process of enforcement transparent and consistent. Many more special conditions are added to make the operations safer and the regulatory compliance effective. With that, we can move on to the questions and answers section. Tammy?
Thank you, Rao. That concludes the presentation. Next slide. We are now at the Q&A portion of this presentation. This slide provides an overview of the 3 ways you can ask a question or make a comment. First way is the Zoom audio. Use the raise hand feature and you will be invited to unmute your audio when it's your turn. The second is phone audio. Press *9 to join the phone queue. I will say the last 3 digits of your phone number when it's your turn. Press *6 to unmute. Text only. Use the Q&A feature to have your question read by myself. We will listen carefully and do our best to answer your questions in this section. Answers will not appear in the response to comments document. If you want a written response to your comment, you must make it later during the hearing. Participants are requested to keep their questions brief and concise, limited to 3 minutes or less. Phil Bloom will now join to assist with this portion of the meeting. Phil.
Thank you, Tammy. I appreciate that introduction. So may I have the first question?
We have Neighbors Against Phibro-Tech.
Hello, can you hear me?
You may unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, neighbors, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So we are here together with about 25 people. And there are several people here who have questions that they'd like to ask. So we're going to ask people here in this room to come up to this microphone to ask their question. So we're ready for the first question?
Yes. Yes.
You want her to step forward?
Yes, she has to come up here, use the microphone.
Tammy, you want to mention again that they need to identify who they are, or they don't need to?
They don't have to, Rob, unless, I mean, if
Just the
during the,
microphone.
This is the
during the
microphone.
hearing portion, then if they want a response, then they have to identify.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're gonna just come up here and ask your question. They should be.
Si gusta pararse o sentarse como quiera, aquí está el micrófono. Haga su question, por favor. Yo hago lo que-
And we all suffer, you know, then like this.
Dígales en español.
You can go ahead.
Si ni en
También.
español.
Yes, our question is, the graph there that you showed, there was many class 1 violations for Phibro-Tech. And it showed in many years there, but more recent years. And in the most recent years, it's kind of is a little worrying to see that there's a lot of more class 1 violations. Now, my understanding of what's gone on there is that there is a sort of a fee or a type of violation that they just have to pay off, and then it's done and they move forward. Where does that leave us, the neighborhood that's taken in this contamination, I would say, still by them just paying off that violation class 1? So can you help us understand that violation, please?
For sure, I will take that. So, James, is it possible to put that slide back up with the
Slide
with
25.
enforcement history? Do you remember which number of slide that was?
25.
Slide 25. Let's just have a quick look at that. But yeah, so now I will say that this timeline is a very brief summary of a lot of inspections and a lot of enforcement actions and summaries of violation and inspection reports. But it is quite nice in that it shows when there were violations and which class of violations they were. Now, I hear what you're saying. It seems like, oh, you know, as long as they pay a fine, no problem, they can keep operating. But I will assure you that for one thing, there are great incentives for the facility to comply. And we have actually increased the incentives to comply quite a lot lately. And I think that is reflective in that, at least as of when we prepared this slide, there was no class 1 violations after 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And now I do note that Rao said maybe that one class 2 violation that was cited in 2023, they're considering, or they have decided to reclassify that as a class 1. But I want to be very clear that if, you know, we have considered their enforcement history quite carefully. We have probably considered Phibro-Tech's enforcement history more carefully than nearly any other facility. And I personally have reviewed the inspection reports and the summary of the compliance history that our enforcement program gave us. And if we believe that the facility posed a significant hazard to the community or even to the workers, we would be talking about denial of this permit. But based on my evaluation, they do not pose a grave hazard to the facility. They don't pose a significant hazard to the community. And so we have decided that based on all the information available, including their compliance history and their recent record of improving compliance, that it is appropriate to approve the permit, to renew the permit. But
In seconds.
Does that answer your question? And I know that, you know, it seems like it's hard to be confident just on the basis of this very brief summary, but I assure you we have been very thoroughly evaluating their compliance history.
Thank you.
Before
Thank
we
you.
move on to the next person in your room, we're going to go to the interpretation line. Monica, did you guys have any questions?
You want to say in English or Spanish?
Yeah, I need.
Tammy, there doesn't appear to be any more questions or hands raised.
No,
You may-
we do, wait, we do
Okay.
have more questions.
Oh, no,
My question is that why they return the company to the same place when a lot of people of us, they die, a lot of kids are getting sick and still being put in bed again? This is a really, out of hand completely. We've been living over there and put it up with that company for very many years, me and my kids and my husband. And my kids, some of the little girl, one of my girls was very sick that she never moved out of the wheelchair till die. And it was this because I was expecting and I was smelled all the things with drinking water and everything was poisoning. I mean, please doing us a favor. We already keep it up with that company for very many years. I hope don't put it in the same place again. I really ask for a favor to remove the company out of there as soon as you can,
Yes.
please.
Well, first of all, I mean, I'm very sorry to hear about the illnesses that your family and your neighbors, I gather, have suffered. That is
Yes.
terrible to hear about. So, I'm sorry to hear that. But I will say we have very carefully evaluated the health risks from the operations at this company and from cleaning up the contaminated soil and groundwater. And we have not identified any significant health hazards. And when I say significant, I mean health hazards that would cause the kind of health problems that you're talking about. And so I do understand that this is a polluted neighborhood, that there's a lot of industry and there's a lot of health hazards, but to the best of our ability to determine, we have not identified any significant health hazards from the operation of the facility. Does anybody else want to provide a response to this comment? Because the health risk is, we have toxicologists, and I know, Katie, you were with the the LA County Department of Health for a while, right? So,
I suggest we can refer this to CY Zheng, who is our toxicologist, who is available in this meeting.
yeah. So listen, we have a toxicologist. CY Zheng is an expert in evaluating the hazards of chemicals and the hazards of the operations of hazardous waste facilities. CY, do you have something to add?
Yes, first of all, my name is CY Chen. I'm the DTSC toxicologist supporting permit renewal for this project. And I've been with DTSC for 16 years. And before I worked another 16 years in industry and consulting. So yeah, I've done a lot of risk assessment. And I recently being assigned to this project, and I had the chance to review the risk assessment that was done in 2015. James, actually, do you mind go back to slide 34? If possible. Yeah, okay. So what a toxicologist does in this case is we look at the current site condition and then use available data to assess potential risk for current and future
Potential risk.
conditions.
Yes.
So, and then the slide show that we actually did two cases, one for the current operation and the other one for historic release. And these risk assessment, they follow EPA, US EPA,
The way she got the way they.
and DTSC guidance. And you know, their review process associated with these comprehensive risk assessments. And both risk assessments show there's no significant hazard or health risk to worker and surrounding community. Okay, so again, you know, that doesn't mean that, you know, the concern about personal health is not legitimate. I think we all feel, like Phil say, you know, there are many possible causes for like cancer and other health hazard. But we actually also look at if there are known cancer cluster in the vicinity of this facility. And the LA County Public Health, they actually did a study back in, I think, 2013, 2014, and they didn't find the cancer instance greater than, you know, that was occur in the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area or in California as a whole. So the bottom line is, you know, again, if you have any specific concern or on the health conditions, we actually suggest that you actually talk to your physician, personal physician, or, you know, contact the county public health. But as far as the current site condition and you know, the historic release, we don't believe that it poses any significant risk to the community.
Mhm. Thank you, CY. If I can just jump in for 1 minute. Thank you so much for describing the health risk assessment, because the community member brought up a really important concern about your exact words were the water has been poisoned. And I want to talk about that just for a moment. So the health risk assessment, it's important to note, did not include assessment of the groundwater, right, CY? Because the groundwater is currently not a source of drinking water. So it's true, this site does, the historic contamination, the hexavalent chromium, poses a threat to the groundwater, but the groundwater is not being used for drinking water. So the drinking water in this area is brought in from outside sources. So that is an important consideration for future. If this groundwater in the area ever wanted, you know, if the city and the residents needed to use local groundwater for drinking water, that could be a problem. So I do want to clarify that piece of the groundwater risk and the relation to the drinking water.
Yeah, that's
Well,
correct. Thanks for clarification, Katie.
Okay.
I like to know about the smell all day and all night. No, this is too much.
So
We gotta take it out of
I
here.
can address, now, is that a new comment or is that the same commenter? Because,
Same comment.
okay, same commenter. So
Yes.
we have
Water
had
again, no.
we have had quite few complaints about the odors, but I will say that the Air Quality Management District, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, is permitting the air emission equipment from Phibro-Tech. Now, to my knowledge, there are no significant air emissions or hazards from air emissions, but they do have permits from the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And the South Coast Air Quality Management District requests that if you have a complaint about odors or about smoke or fumes or air pollution, that you can call them and file a complaint and ask them questions about what they know about it too. But as far as I know, there are no significant odor complaints about Phibro-Tech. Now, I know that there are a number of industrial facilities in the neighborhood, and some of them may have air emissions that are emitting foul odors, but we don't have that information about Phibro-Tech. Okay, neighbors. Now, Tammy, who's next?
Neighbors, oh yeah, we have one right here. Neighbors,
Are we unmuted?
yes. Neighbors, before you bring the next person up, can we ask that you keep these questions to the presentation? Because we will have another section, the formal hearing, where they'll be able to make their comments so that we can get through all your commenters. Otherwise, we're going to spend a lot of time not talking about the presentation, and these questions should be inside the hearing portion.
Can we just ask our questions now, and will they be included in terms of what goes into the record?
No, these questions that's asked in this portion, you will not receive a written document on. So if you want a written document, you need to ask those questions in the hearing portion.
And if you want to ask the question in the Q&A section and then make a comment about it, the same thing later in the hearing, that's okay. We're okay with that. But let's focus on questions that we can answer now.
What I was talking about. I mean, what do you think?
I think the purpose of this current session is for us to be able to clarify what we presented. If you have questions regarding what we presented, specific questions on any part that we just communicated to you.
Okay, we have a question.
I do have a question.
Yes.
As far as the assessments for the health of the community, did you go beyond the gates of the business? Did you go to the neighbors? Did you ask questions? Did you go door to door and ask who's had cancer, who's passed away? Did you do that kind of assessment? Because I never got any kind of flyer, or nobody knocked on my door. What kind of assessment did you guys do?
So if I may, there's several different kinds of information gathering activities, which we did conduct. And Tammy reached out to members of the community and interviewed several that were willing to be interviewed. We also sent out surveys, quite a few. Tammy, you can remind me how many surveys we sent out. But with respect to the health risk assessment, now we focused on the operations of the facility, and the risk assessment is available for review. It's on the internet if you want to look and see exactly what we did. But in a very brief summary, for the calculating the risk of the current operations, we identified a potential likely scenario of a release of some of the waste at the facility, and we evaluated the risks to the public and to the workers of emissions from that potential release, and that's how we calculated it. That is an entirely different study when you evaluate members of the public that are suffering from some health effects or something, and we did not do that kind of study. Katie, that may be something that LA County has information on. If your past experience could be informative, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of concerns about health, cancer, other health concerns, and right after this meeting, tomorrow I'll reach back to my colleagues at Los Angeles County Public Health to see what they have. But the question was about any surveying we've done. It sounds like we've done a limited amount, but we haven't done a comprehensive survey, and that's something.
How can you say that it's not as bad for the community if you haven't done a comprehensive survey?
Right. So, and that's something that we would typically partner with the health department on. So I will get some more information on that for you.
And he did say that a survey was done of some sort, some kind of flyers.
Yeah.
And when was that?
Yeah, Tammy, you have more specific information about that. Do you want to explain the outreach activities that we conducted?
The outreach efforts that we conducted was a community survey, and it's a basic survey just to find out how much information you know about the facility, what are some of your concerns about the facility, and how best can we reach you when we sending out documents. We sent over 1,500 surveys out in approximately 2021. We did not do door-to-door due to COVID. And we
So
did
not necessarily questions about anyone's health.
correct.
Okay.
And we did conduct 2 rounds of community interviews, very limited due to the individuals that we reached out to or tried to reach out to get them to do a community interview with us.
And anything before COVID was done like that?
I don't think the permit was prior to COVID. I don't think the permit was ready to go out for public comment, period.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. That's kind of ancient history. Tammy wasn't involved in the project at that time, but back in, I believe it was 2014, we conducted a number of community interviews, and that was Tammy's predecessor assisted with that. I'm sorry, Marcus, do you remember his name? Jose, I think it was Jose.
Jesus.
Sorry, Jesus, I apologize. Jesus. Anyway, we did conduct a number of interviews, and we found out some things that people were concerned about, and many of the people that we interviewed did not express particular concerns. But that, as I mentioned during my discussion of the history of the permit renewal activities, after all of those activities, we decided not to process that permit that was prepared in 2010, and we required a new permit application, new health risk assessments, and we prepared a new permit. So we have done a lot to reach out to the community, both back in 2013, 2014, and also in 2021, like Tammy mentioned.
I'm done. Thank you.
And I think January 2013, there was an open house for anyone to walk in and actually express their concerns too. And DTSC works with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. The first responders who respond to health issues and things like that, they also include the Santa Fe Springs Department of Fire Department and Air Quality Management District. They are the first ones who actually come in and control the facility. If there were any issues that were connected to the facility operations, they are the ones who would respond. So we have connected with those individuals in preparation of these permit application, and we're not aware of any significant health risks that can be attributed or connected to the operations of this facility.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Raul. Tammy, do we have more questions?
We do not. Neighbors, do you have anyone else that would like to ask a question regarding the presentation?
Yes, my name is Jaime Sanchez, and rest assured that we have requested. Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, sounds good. Mr. Bloom, Mr. Akula, and all the remaining members of DTSC, rest assured that we have requested on numerous occasions from 2011 to the present an environmental impact report and a health risk assessment that takes the community into consideration. We have requested monitoring in the community, not simply at the facility. So the information that you are providing in this public forum is inaccurate. We request once again an environmental impact report that includes us, that does not candy coat the issues. In 1995, Phibro-Tech agreed to clean up the hexavalent chromium contamination within 1 year. Over a quarter of a century later, they have still failed to do so. And the DTSC has still failed to have them comply. We do not agree with the presentation that you've made today. Unfortunately, our time at this facility is limited. It is now 7:20. We have not had an opportunity for the hearing portion, and we have to exit this facility at 7:30. We have 10 minutes to address our concerns to you, and it's obvious to us that we will be unable to do so. We do not agree with your presentation. We believe that Phibro-Tech is a serial polluter and that the permit should be denied, just as it was with the Exide. They are a historic contaminator and violator, and we ask that you deny the permit, that you do not consider the issuance of the permit.
Okay, so thank you, Jaime Sanchez. I appreciate your point, but I'm going to say that that's not really a question. I am getting that you would like to go to the comment portion of the hearing, but are there any other questions that anybody wants to ask before we go to comments? I was unaware of your time constraints, and we apologize for that. It was certainly not our intent to limit your ability to comment. And I also want to make sure that everybody knows that we are also receiving written comments, and you can send them by email or by mail. And Tammy's going to go over the details on that as soon as we get to that portion of the presentation. But were there any other comments? Questions before we go to the hearing? So hearing none, Tammy, I know that our normal presentation that we prepared proposes to go to a 5-minute break, but having heard what Mr. Sanchez expressed about how brief their time is, can we go to the hearing portion directly? Is everybody okay with that? I apologize, but that is the best way to give them a chance to present their comments.
Okay. Let's go to the hearing. We are now at the hearing section of this meeting. We will receive your comments without responding. Hearing comments will be answered in the response to comment document accompanying the final permit decision. In the public hearing portion of this meeting, I will now introduce Phil Bloom, the DTSC hearing officer. Phil?
Thank you, Tammy. Listen, I thought you were going to go to slide 42 and provide an opportunity to repeat the instructions, but are we going to skip that then, given the interest of time?
They said they have to leave out in 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I skipped my slide. I apologize. Okay, so I'm sorry, slide 41. So yeah, my name is Phil Bloom. As I mentioned, I am the hearing officer, and it is now 7:23 on July 12th, 2023. And in the interest of time to accommodate Mr. Sanchez and his community members, let's go straight to the portion of the hearing rather than repeating the instructions that we already actually gave during the beginning. We were going to do that, but let's just go straight to the public comments. May I have the first comment, please?
Yes, Mr. Bloom, my name is Jaime Sanchez. I am a member of Neighbors Against Phibro-Tech. We have made presentations before the DTSC on numerous occasions. We are a community-based organization of residents of Los Nietos and Santa Fe Springs. We are opposed to the permit renewal and instead respectfully request that the DTSC deny the application for Phibro-Tech. The request is based on the historic and ongoing failure of Phibro-Tech to comply with laws, regulations, and policies governing hazardous materials and hazardous waste. It's a matter of public record that for more than a quarter of a century, federal, state, and local authorities have attempted to no avail to resolve this matter. It's also a matter of public record that as a result of Phibro-Tech's failure to comply, the groundwater, soil, and the air have become contaminated with heavy metals, halogenated volatile organic compounds, aromatic VOCs, and chlorides. Moreover, the record shows that Phibro-Tech seeks to expand the facility's capacity by more than 90%. It is our opinion that such activity would compound the problem with the inherent danger of making matters worse. The Department of Toxic Substances Control has failed, let me repeat that, failed in its stated common mission to protect California's people and the environment from the harmful effects of toxic substances. The DTSC is mandated to enforce the law in favor of the public, not the toxic substances industry. That is, to interpret the intent of the law to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public from the innumerable dangers of toxic substances. The failure of DTSC to enforce the law against serial polluters such as Phibro-Tech has, in our opinion, placed our community and others throughout California at great risk of both human and environmental dangers. I'm going to quote from an article that was published on July the 6th, 2023 in CNN. It stated the following. The title is "Nearly half of the tap water in the US is contaminated with forever chemicals. Government studies find." In June 2022, based on the latest science, the EPA issued health advisories that said chemicals are much more hazardous to human health than scientists originally thought, and are probably more dangerous, even at levels thousands of times lower than previously believed. So instead of recognizing this, the DTSC has allowed Phibro-Tech to operate with an expired permit for more than a quarter of a century, to operate while failing to clean up extreme hexavalent chromium contamination as agreed upon in 1995, to operate with an egregious violations history, ranking it third in the entire state of California. In addition, SB 673 required the DTSC to adopt regulations by January 1st, 2018, which established or updated criteria for the issuance of a new, modified, or renewal permit. Of specific significance was the inclusion of the consideration of the vulnerability of and existing health risks to nearby populations, which you have failed to do here, and consideration of conditions that warrant a permit denial or suspension, which we have repeatedly asked you to do. The DTSC was required to develop and implement programmatic reforms designed to improve the protectiveness of the department's permitting programs, which includes strengthening environmental justice safeguards, which you have failed to do, and enhancing public health protections on or before July the 1st, 2018. The DTSC has not complied and is currently in violation of SB 673 deadlines. This is a clear violation of our right to due process. SB 673 is clear and unequivocal evidence of the legislature's intent that the DTSC should consider the vulnerability of existing health risks to nearby populations, which you have failed to do, as well as environmental justice and public health more broadly in its permit decisions, which you have failed to do. We have requested on numerous occasions that the DTSC conduct an environmental impact report and health risk assessment that includes our community. And the record speaks for itself. The DTSC has failed to do so. The DTSC is not our enemy. It is our adversary, and we want it to be our ally. Neighbors Against Phibro-Tech is part of a statewide coalition that wants the DTSC to correct its failures and fulfill its mandate. We want the DTSC to revoke and deny permits for the most egregious violators, which includes Phibro-Tech. We want the DTSC to send a clear message to all violators that such business conduct will no longer be tolerated. And we want the DTSC to know that we will continue our struggle for the type of community we want to live in, and that is one which is safe from the effects of toxic substances. And we will support others who wish to do the same. For the aforementioned reasons, Neighbors Against Phibro-Tech requests that the DTSC deny the hazardous waste permit renewal for Phibro-Tech and instead implement the existing facility closure plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. I appreciate your comments. Are there any other commenters that wish to make a comment? So I hear somebody speaking in the background, but if they're making a comment, can they approach the microphone?
Sí, ellos tienen interpretación. No, lo digo en inglés y en español. Will you please take the place away immediately? My daughter died because the smell and everything, she gets so sick. No quiero que dejen esa compañía allí, que la quiten por favor inmediatamente porque hay muchos lugares que pueden ponerla donde no daña a nadie. ¿Por qué tiene que ser que nos tiene que dañar a nosotros? Cuando ya saben cuánta gente se ha muerto a causa de eso. Por favor, muévanla. Les agradecería mucho que la movieran inmediatamente, no la pongan ahí más. Gracias. Soy Esther Rojo.
Muchas gracias por compartir
Yes,
su historia. Y lo siento muchísimo. Palabras no pueden explicar. Lo siento.
Now, one thing I want to remind people, if you wish to get a written response to the comments, we are happy to provide them, but we need contact information for you, as I think Tammy mentioned. So yes, if you want to make a comment and get a response, please make sure we know how to get our responses to you. Okay, are there any more comments?
Yeah, is there anyone else who? Okay, so we've got more speakers.
Hi.
Okay, neighbors, I see you have your hand up. You wish to make a comment?
Hi, good evening. My name is Sinai. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yes, this is my comment. So for more than 25 years, Phibro-Tech has been violating hazardous waste laws, contaminating soil and groundwater in the community of Los Nietos. DTSC's proposed hazardous waste permit for Phibro-Tech blatantly ignores the disproportionate harm and health risks for Phibro-Tech on this already overburdened community. According to the EPA's Environmental Justice Screen Report, families surrounding Phibro-Tech face high risks of cancer and respiratory health impacts caused by air toxins and exposure to particulate matter. It is not a coincidence, but rather a hallmark of hazardous waste permitting that Phibro-Tech is located in a community that is 87% people of color with an annual income that is lower than the county average. On December 16, 2022, neighbors against Phibro-Tech submitted comments on the proposed permit. Those comments address 4 primary problems in the proposed permit that DTSC must address. First, the public engagement process was flawed and failed to make necessary information publicly accessible. To fix this, DTSC must ensure meaningful engagement with the community and make all necessary documents publicly available. Second, DTSC failed to consider the facility's violations and cumulative impacts in its permit decision. DTSC's violation scoring procedure is flawed and hides the reality of Phibro-Tech's harms. DTSC also failed to assess the cumulative impacts that burden the community. Therefore, DTSC must incorporate these mandated protections as it reviews Phibro-Tech's permit renewal application. Third, DTSC failed to conduct the required environmental review before allowing Phibro-Tech to expand and renew its hazardous waste permit. Rather than conducting an up-to-date environmental review, DTSC relies on an outdated 1991 review of the facility's environmental impacts. DTSC must undertake an updated environmental review. And fourth, DTSC failed to collect adequate pollution data, ignoring the levels of pollution outside of Phibro-Tech's borders. To complete a comprehensive health risk assessment, DTSC must study pollution exposures beyond the boundaries of Phibro-Tech's facility prior to making a final decision on its permit renewal application. DTSC must act now and prioritize residents' concerns about the environmental injustices that Phibro-Tech is creating in their community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Are there any more comments?
Yes. I would like to, this is Angela Johnson-Mazaros, and I'd like to speak to the historical violation history of Phibro-Tech. You showed us a chart in your presentation, which seemed to indicate that Phibro-Tech is not the serial violator with the long and troubled enforcement history that it actually has. In fact, back in 1999, Phibro-Tech was penalized $48,000 in a consent decree for a series of violations that it had. And in fact, every year since 1999, there's been a violation or a hazardous incident at the facility. Your assurances that Phibro-Tech is getting better is not an adequate assurance for this community. Phibro-Tech needs to be held accountable for its history, for its decisions, for its impacts, and its harms. And for DTSC to come to this meeting tonight and tell this community that they're better off with Phibro-Tech renewing its permit than shutting it down is a travesty. Second, for you to come to this meeting tonight and tell this community that you have already decided that this facility has no harms and no impacts, despite their long history, their extensive violations, their extensive pollution, and the real lived experiences of the people in this community is the second travesty tonight. The third travesty tonight is for you to tell this community that you've already decided with inadequate environmental review, with inadequate human health assessment, that you've already decided that you're going to renew this permit is a third travesty. We demand better from DTSC. We demand DTSC hear this community, see this community. And the final thing that I'll note is that this meeting tonight is not engagement with the community. A virtual meeting in a webinar format where you can't see the faces of the people who live in this community, who've come to this library to talk to this agency about its experiences with this facility, is the fourth travesty tonight. And 4 travesties is 4 travesties too many. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we have the next commenter? Can you state your name prior to your comment, please?
Yes, this is Sarah Royer. Can you hear me good?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. DTSC's decision not to draft an environmental impact report violates the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. Phibro-Tech's long history of violations over the past 30 years is not just sufficient evidence, but concrete evidence that Phibro-Tech has harmed the environment and surrounding communities. A mitigated negative declaration is only appropriate when an agency lacks sufficient evidence that a facility may harm the environment. Phibro-Tech has contaminated the air, water, and soil, and the impacts of that contamination must be fully studied in an environmental impact report. An environmental impact report is a document of accountability, and it is time to finally hold Phibro-Tech accountable for its harms. Further, DTSC's negative declaration lacks a legally sufficient project description. It ignores Phibro-Tech's proposed expansion and fails to describe Phibro-Tech's operations. This violates CEQA and DTSC's mission to protect people, communities, and the environment from hazardous waste requires a thorough and honest CEQA analysis of Phibro-Tech's harmful impacts. In order to comply with CEQA, DTSC needs to submit an EIR. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next commenter, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, can you state your
Yes,
name?
I hear you.
Yes, my name is Luther Relos, and I'm submitting these public comments in support of Neighbors Against Phibro-Tech. The draft permit for Phibro-Tech is inherently flawed because DTSC relies on an inadequate health risk assessment that ignores impacts to the surrounding community. Investigations at the Phibro-Tech site have detected a variety of volatile organic compounds in groundwater, soil, and soil vapor. However, DTSC claims that the 2015 Human Health Risk Assessment shows that current operations and historical releases at this facility have no significant health effect to residents or workers. This health risk assessment that DTSC is relying on to support these claims is flawed in at least 3 ways. First, the health risk assessment incorrectly states that the residential community is located 1,000 feet north of the facility, when the actual distance is 540 feet. Since an incorrect distance was used for risk calculations, the health risk assessment may have underestimated residents' potential exposure to contamination. Second, the health risk assessment limits soil vapor sample locations to the Phibro-Tech site. For example, figure 8 in the HRA shows question marks in the areas extending beyond the boundaries of Phibro-Tech. This shows that the levels of pollution that nearby residents and workers are exposed to is nothing more than guesswork. Third, the HRA ignores that VOCs in the soil and water may migrate in other directions. Without data from offsite monitoring points, DTSC cannot claim that people beyond the boundaries of Phibro-Tech are not impacted by the extensive soil and water pollution at this facility. For these reasons, DTSC must undertake a health risk assessment that comprehensively studies pollution exposures beyond the boundaries of the Phibro-Tech site. Until then, DTSC cannot make a final decision on this permit. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next commenter, please.
We have one person who wants to comment. Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you state your name, please?
My name is Annie Wang, and I'm speaking in support of Neighbors Against Phibro-Tech. Today, I've seen that there hasn't been very much concern and respect for the health and the needs of the community that this decision is impacting. Today, there's a man who spoke today who boldly told a member here to check with her physician because her health issues are personal and unrelated to the environmental factors present. You so boldly made that statement based on a singular, incomplete, flawed study, valuing that over the lived experiences of the people here today. The truth is that there are so many countless studies that have shown that the hazardous materials and compounds present at Phibro-Tech definitively cause and exacerbate health issues, such as the ones currently faced by the community here today. So I'm very ashamed that today you have made disrespectful comments, literally gaslighting the community, absolutely disrespecting the health needs of the community your decisions impact. I'm ashamed for you that you can call yourself an employee of a public agency because you clearly do not have the interests of the public at heart. And if you are truly sorry, like you keep saying that you are, I hope that you take accountability for the needs of the community here today. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next commenter, please.
Hello, can I add one more comment?
Yes, and could you state your name, please?
Yes, my name is Jeremy Gartland. I'm a resident of LA County. Tonight, I've been assisting some of the community members here who are Spanish language speakers and utilizing the live translation services. And I'd just like to underscore the insufficiency of hosting this meeting online instead of in person. As I was listening to the live translation, I could tell that only about 60% of the information presented in this meeting tonight was actually being translated. And I'd like to commend the translators for doing the best that they can, but the reality is without a live meeting where the presenters are taking pauses, allowing time for translation to occur, it's just not possible to get across all of the information. And it's one of the ways that this process has been insufficient to inform and involve the predominantly Spanish-speaking community here that is impacted by Phibro-Tech's pollution. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have the next commenter, please?
We're done. That's all the comments from here.
Thank you. Brian Chan. You may speak. Please state your name first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Byron Chan. I'm speaking in support of Neighbors Against Phibro-Tech. Just want to quickly say, I understand that you all are experts, but I also encourage you to use your common sense as well. And you've acknowledged tonight that Phibro-Tech is a serial polluter, and it defies common sense that a serial hazardous waste polluter located within 600 feet of residents would have no impact on community health. And in fact, community members tonight have shared those impacts with you all, but all I really hear in response from DTSC is deflection. And that's really unfortunate. For example, I hear you say, well, if you smell something bad, you should be going to the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And you tell people to call that agency. But DTSC, you are the state agency responsible for regulating hazardous waste facilities, and telling community members to look elsewhere for help is just unacceptable. And second, DTSC is deflecting by saying that there are other polluters in this neighborhood. And it's an unfortunate fact that this is an overburdened community, but that fact should encourage DTSC to prioritize this process, this permit process, rather than be a fact that DTSC uses to deflect the real lived experiences of community members. So I echo all of the comments that have been made about the insufficiency of this process, and I encourage DTSC to deny Phibro-Tech's permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another commenter? Do we have a commenter on the Spanish, on the interpreter's line? Thank you. At this time, we feel we don't have any more comments, and I turn the meeting back over to you.
Thank you, Tammy. Also, listen, thank you very much, everybody, for your comments, your questions. We will prepare a response to comments document. We will consider your comments carefully as we decide how to proceed with our draft permit for the Phibro-Tech. I will say one thing to Mr. Chan. Mr. Chan, I didn't mean to suggest you should not make a complaint to DTSC. DTSC enforcement will receive complaints and will act on complaints. But it's my understanding that the AQMD has specifically requested that they receive complaints about odor complaints and air quality and so on. So please feel free to refer your complaints, any complaints about odors in the area of Phibro-Tech. We will investigate them, but we'll also refer them to the AQMD. So anyway, thank you everybody for your questions and comments. I do appreciate all the time and effort that you put into reviewing our documents and considering them and providing input to us today. Now, Tammy, did you want to go over the how to submit additional comments if there were further comments that you wanted to make after the close of the meeting today?
Yes.
That would be slide 43, right? Go ahead.
Okay. If you did not submit a comment during this hearing verbally or using the Q&A function, you may submit a written comment as follows: by mail to Rao Akula, the project manager at DTSC Chatsworth Regional Office located at 9211 Oakdale Avenue in Chatsworth, California, 91311, or by email rao.akula@dtsc.ca.gov. His information will be sent out in the chat. All comments must be received by July 25th, 2023. Next slide. Public comment period began June 6, 2023 through July 25th, 2023. Information regarding DTSC, the Phibro-Tech facility, the draft permit, the permit application can be found at the information repositories. Los Nietos Public Library, located at 8511 Dutchess Drive in Whittier, California, 90606, or call 562-695-0708 for hours. The Santa Fe Spring Library at 11700 Telegraph Road, located in Santa Fe Springs, California, 90670. Call area code 562-868-7738 for hours. The documents are also located at DTSC Chatsworth Regional Office at 9211 Oakdale Avenue, Chatsworth, California, 91311, or call area code 818-717-6521 for an appointment. You can check DTSC website at www.envirostore.dtsc.ca.gov. ID number CAD 0084888025. This information will be located in the chat. Next slide. I want to say thank you on behalf of DTSC for joining us. Please be safe and be well.
Thank you, Tammy, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to note that for the record, the comment portion of the meeting is closed. But given that we kind of jumped into the comment portion abruptly, not making sure that we had answered everybody's questions, I am willing to stay if there are other questions that people have, and anybody else from our permitting team that wishes to do so, that's fine as well. But otherwise, so are there any further questions that people had? I know I attempted to accommodate Mr. Sanchez and the people that were there at the library, but but if anybody didn't get a chance to ask a question you wanted to ask, feel free. We'll take a few minutes to ask to try to answer any other questions that there may be. Do you have any other questions? Oh, I see there's something in the chat. Tammy, can you see those? Okay, maybe it's just my project team.
Angela Johnson Mazzarato. She asked how long was the presentation would last. Someone answered her. And then it was, will you take verbal questions after this presentation? She was answering.
We already did answer those questions in the Q&A.
In the Q&A, we don't have anything in the chat.
Yeah, okay.
Hi,
I see Byron.
Hi, my name is Byron. Someone just unmuted me. I did have a question on the presentation, if I can ask that now.
Sure, Byron. Thank you for your time. Go ahead.
Thanks, Phil. I did have a question about, I was looking at the slide for the violations at Phibro-Tech, and I noticed that for 2023, there was a class 2 violation. I'm a little bit unclear. I understand the definition of a class 1 violation, but it feels like there's a lot of discretion on the part of DTSC about how to categorize violations, and then also how to score them for purposes of a violation scoring procedure. So in particular, in the 2023 class 2 violation, my understanding is that that was from an incident that occurred on February 7th, where the facility released about 7,000 gallons of wastewater. And the wastewater exceeded the soluble threshold limit concentration for hazardous waste for copper by almost double. So that threshold is 25 milligrams, and the measured concentration was 47.6. So again, 7,000 gallons of wastewater with almost double the concentration of acceptable, the allowable threshold for copper. But then that DTSC classified that incident as a class 2 violation, and then Phibro-Tech received a score of 0 for their violation scoring procedure. I just don't have any insight into how there's a disconnect for me that I'm hoping you can answer about why that incident is a class 2 violation that then deserves a score of 0.
So if I may, so as Raul mentioned while he was presenting that slide, and James, if you are still with us, can you show slide 25, please? That's the slide he's talking about.
Yeah, and Phil, I can jump in here. So
okay, please, Katie. It sounds like you may have some background that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, Byron, this is a great comment and question, and really you're on point. That class 2 violation is currently under review.
Okay, I understand. You mean under review to potentially be a class 1 violation?
Yes.
Well, I mean, okay, I thought it had been reclassified as a class 1, but I might have I might have crossed my wires. But nonetheless, you're right, Byron. Sometimes there is some discretion on DTSC's part about how to interpret whether a violation is a class 2 or a class 1. And there's also a provision of the regulations in which if a class 2 violation has been repeated, that might be counted as a class 1 for the purposes of enforcement actions, penalties, and the VSP scores. So, the regs do give us a fair amount of discretion, but sometimes it's quite clear, sometimes it's not, as to what class a violation is. So in this case, that is a very good question, like Katie said. Now, also with respect to the penalty and how it is counted for the VSP score, enforcement also considers the extent of deviation and the potential for harm. So like in this particular case where there was wastewater disposed to the sewer that exceeded the sanitation district's discharge limit, it's a clear violation, right? So there's no question about the extent of the violation. It was like a clear violation. They were definitely in the wrong. Now the potential for harm is a little bit different. Since it went to the sewer, it wasn't dumped in the storm drain and it didn't go in the gutter or wherever. Maybe the potential for harm is a little lower. So those are the kinds of factors considered when deciding how to classify it and what the penalties would be and what the score would be for VSP purposes.
I'd like to add something to what Phil just said. Originally, when the inspector reviewed this, he issued it as a class 2 violation. For class 2 violations, VSP scores are not included. VSP, it doesn't get counted into VSPs. So the document you're referring to, Byron, was corresponding to the time when it was considered a class 2 violation. And like Katie mentioned, it is being reviewed. It could be revised. DTSC has the right to revise these things, and they may be posting the draft violations at the time of their filing, and then they would be finalized, and DTSC can revise that with time.
Yeah. And so, of course, if it does get reclassed as a class 1, it will have a VSP score, and it will affect the facility VSP score and potentially what tier the facility's score falls in.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. I appreciate the response from all of you. I would just end by saying, I think that DTSC does have incredible powers and incredible discretion. I know that there's language and regulations and laws, but those regulations and laws do give a lot of discretion to DTSC, and I think this is an example of an exercise of that discretion. And I would just encourage DTSC, as you're coming across these opportunities where your discretion is really at issue, to really be guided by your mission in figuring out where that discretion should lie. Should it lie with protecting communities? Those community members that showed up today and spent the evening with you all to share their lived experiences with you? Or should that discretion fall to, serial polluters, which is really what we're dealing with here? So just wanted to end on that. Thank you again for your time. And I look forward to continuing to work with you on this facility and this permit. Thank you.
You're welcome, Byron. I appreciate your words. Listen, are there any other questions that we can help with? Any other questions that people have that they'd like to discuss with us? That'd be a great time. And, our goal is to make sure that the presentation that we made today is clear and that everybody understood it. But if you have other questions that we didn't go over or about something about why we didn't go over it, we will address those questions if we can.
Until July 25th, we can still entertain the questions.
Well, of course, anybody can send us in a comment until July 25th, and we will include a response in the response to comments. But just in terms of questions about the presentation that we made, about the permit regulations and requirements, about the facility, more able to entertain those kind of questions. I will give like about a half a minute if anybody wants to get to the mic and ask us a question. Otherwise, I'm going to thank everybody for participating and joining our meeting tonight. I do appreciate the outreach that we've gotten, or the participation and responses and comments that we've gotten. And as Tammy said, the comment period extends until the 25th. And so that concludes tonight's meeting and presentation. Thank you very much, everybody.